Welcome everyone to the, they have the wrong date on here, just realized. Okay, sorry. Welcome to the Audits and Risk Management Committee meeting, Thursday, March 7th, 2024. We're getting to start a little bit early, so we may have to take things a little bit out of order. There's Chris, would you like to take roll?
For the State Controller, Ms. Gallegos.
Here.
For the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Ms. Sanders.
Here.
Mr. Keeley.
Here.
For the State Treasurer, Mr. Henning.
Here.
For the Director of Finance, Ms. Whitaker.
Here.
Chairperson Bradford, you have a quorum.
Thank you so much.
And now I will read a brief statement on public comment. The CalSTRS board meetings are live web streamed, video archived, and available to the public on calstrs.com. Individuals who wish to address the board should wait for the 10-minute public comment period at the end of the agenda item the speaker wishes to address. For comments not pertaining to a specific agenda item, there will be an opportunity for additional statements at the end of the open session. Each speaker is allowed a maximum of 3 minutes to comment. However, if there is not enough time for each speaker to have 3 minutes, the timing will be at the discretion of the chair. To protect the privacy of speakers under the age of 18 who wish to address the board, only their first name and affiliated organization may be provided, but other personal identifying information such as their last name, age, or school may not be shared.
Thank you so much. Okay, first we have approval of the agenda with flexibility and the approval of minutes. We could do that together. I'll take a motion.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Without objection, we will approve those. Any objections? Okay, we'll move on to item number 3, informational items. Financial statement audit, client services planned for fiscal year 23-24 with Kevin Smith and Jen Aris.
So as they're coming up, I'm going to just say a few comments for especially the new members.
Sorry, Cheryl,
No worries, no worries. So just wanted to remind everyone here that each year CalSTRS is required to have their financial statements audited by independent certified public accounting firm, and it's overseen by this committee. And Crow LLP is our financial statement auditor, and they plan to perform 2 audits, one of our basic financial statements and includes our supplementary information as well as our other pension information of the State Teachers Retirement Plan. I'll hand it off.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. Well, we were joking and speaking with someone yesterday that we blinked and it's time for the 2024 audit. It feels like we just wrapped up fiscal year 2023. But as Cheryl mentioned, we're here today to present our audit service plan for the fiscal year 2024 audit. So we have a brief agenda here for you. We're going to speak through our client service team, talk about the roles and responsibilities for really the 3 key parties as part of the audit process, highlight the scope and deliverables of our audit, speak about our overall audit approach and timeline. There are some required communications that we will go through with the committee and your role as those charged with governance. And then, of course, if you have any questions for us, we're happy to address those as well. So starting here and highlighting our client service team, I'm Jen Aris. I'm an audit partner with Crow and one of the engagement partners on the CalSTRS audit engagement. Sitting next to me is Kevin Smith. He is actually the signing partner, so you'll see his signature on your audit opinions this year. And then joining us as part of the partner roster, if you will, we actually have 3 other partners that support the audit process. And so Chris Moore is an investment valuation partner expert. Really, that's his main field of work. And so he supports and consults on some of the alternative investments. And then related to the information technology structure of the system, we actually have 2 partners really in gearing up for the pension solution project that will become financially significant in a future audit year. We have Rich Perilou and Sean Katzenberger that both serve as part of the audit team. Additionally, we have a manager support group that rounds out the executive level sponsor or executive level work here on the audit. So we have 3 senior managers that really contribute to the overall audit process. They are all continuing on the engagement. And then again, we've broken out that IT component and really assigned some specialists to perform those procedures. And then lastly, we do make use of some other specialists. Gabriel Roeder-Smith is our actuarial specialist that we work with in reviewing the actuarial information that comes from the system. And then for certain investments, we actually utilize Harvest Investments as another third party to validate some of those valuations. So as we think about the audit process, there are really three key parties involved in the audit. And so it really starts with you all in your role as those charged with governance as part of the ARM committee. Your role is really to oversee the external auditor, including scope, approach, and timeline, and ensure the appropriateness for the system. And then also to oversee management in their reporting and the integrity of the financial information that's ultimately published. Management is very focused on designing and making sure that they're operating internal controls in a way that the financial data is processed and summarized or accumulated in a way to present the fair financial statements that are in accordance with GAAP, or generally accepted accounting principles. And then lastly, Crow, as your independent auditor, is responsible to audit that information under both generally accepted audit standards and governmental audit standards. And then we actually serve as a component auditor to the state auditor for the state of California as well. So from a scope and deliverable perspective, as Cheryl mentioned, we are engaged to perform two separate audits, both over the system's financial statements and then over the other pension information that is utilized by the employers that contribute to the system. We also issue an audit report related to the internal controls over financial reporting. And then at the conclusion of the audit process, we'll meet with the committee again in November and go through the required communications to those charged with governance. And then should we have any findings related to our audit, we would bring those to your attention as well. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kevin.
Thank you. So today I will go at a very high level our approach to the audit, and then again is when we come back in November we would address whether or not there were any changes to our overall audit approach. So I think the key message throughout this slide is that it is a continuous process. We're in the process right now of our planning stages, our risk assessment, etc. But that's really an iterative process that continues throughout the engagement, and we'll see that on a future slide. But again, some things to kind of keep in mind. Although we have, experience with CalSTRS, each year we have to think of this as a standalone engagement. Each fiscal year, kind of wipe the slate clean and everything, no assumptions made. That really requires us to act with a significant amount of professional skepticism, independence, and objectivity. And as we start talking about changes in risk assessments, et cetera, that has an impact upon the level of objectivity that we apply to certain procedures. As I said, the auditing is in a continuous risk assessment, and we are committed to the audit quality. Some of the other things that we do, particularly at interim, is perform inquiries with you, the ARM committee members, to understand your perception of audit risk, financial statement reporting risk, or any other concerns that you might have related to the audit staff. We also meet with several key CalSTRS executives and other system staff, and that's really responsible for, or really to perform two items. One, the typical SAS 99 inquiries, whether or not somebody's aware of fraud, whether they've heard of any fraud allegations, et cetera. But even more importantly, to understand about any changes within the organization. That can be investment strategies, that could be the setup of new departments, a variety of things, and what impact does that have over the financial reporting process. We also, at the conclusion of that risk assessment and testing of internal controls, are required to perform substantive testing over significant risk in key audit areas, and we'll talk about each of those in greater depth. So we have identified, as part of our planning, the significant audit areas as well as the identified risk included within those. The four that we've identified are investments, contributions, total and net pension liability with the associated deferred inflows and outflows, as well as financial reporting. As you can see, we identify where that could go wrong from a risk standpoint. So for example, on investments, the first thing we think of is, do they exist and are they safeguarded? Second step, and even more importantly, are they valued appropriately? So that's where you see how you start thinking about the identified risk, and you also see our summarized and planned audit approaches in each of those areas. We're also required to assess whether or not we believe a risk of material misstatement could occur. And as you can see, the two areas that we spend the most significant time, again, is in the valuation of the investments, as well as the assumptions embedded within the actuarial. As Jen mentioned, we blinked and we're already back, but in reality, it really started in October. So the second we issue last year, we start really looking, particularly as it relates to the procedures that we do at your K through 12s. On an annual basis, we pick approximately 100 school districts that we visit on an annual basis to understand their books and records and the information that they're reporting to the system. We can begin that quickly because that's the information that is submitted as part of the actuarial report. It's always kind of a year in arrears, so we begin that testing immediately so that we can come back in November and report. So October through now of March 2024, we've been heavily involved in understanding the planning and any changes that we are aware of within the system. We've also we will begin execution of our planned interim procedures beginning next month, and that would include, again, testing of IT controls over financially significant systems, test of internal controls, as well as procedures that allow kind of a walkthrough approach or a roll forward, particularly as it relates to contributions and distributions. Now, when we come back and really think about August to September, that's when we're fulfilling all of our substantive procedures, and this is primarily in the area of investments when we spend the vast majority of time trying to understand that fair value as of June 30th. And then we intend to be back here in November 2024 issuing our financial statements again. Some of our required communications, so we do utilize a concept known as materiality. This is both a quantitative and a qualitative benchmark that we really determine what is the amount of misstatement that could occur that could have an impact upon users of the financial statements. We don't test to the penny. We don't test every transaction. If that was the case, we'd have just as many staff as CalSTRS does, and we'd sit right behind them throughout the year. So we do have a concept of materiality that we apply through our engagement, and that really drives our sampling, our test of details, etc. We are responsible for developing an audit approach that assess the risk of material misstatement, whether that's due to error or fraud. We are responsible for designing our procedures that would identify that misstatement. If we were to identify fraud, we would follow the appropriate chain of command in telling either management and or the chair of this committee what we identified. Historically, that has not been an issue. Again, it's not something we anticipate, but it's something we are responsible for and would address if it occurred. We primarily use the work of internal audit as part of our risk assessment. You have a very active and quality audit or internal audit department. We obtain their reports throughout the year as they are issued. We read those, we understand the findings, we communicate when necessary back with the internal audit department. And really, again, it's part of our robust approach to identifying any significant areas that perhaps need to be addressed in the current year approach. And we'll meet with each of you individually as ARM committee members to identify any matters that you may want us to pay particular attention to in the current year. Key considerations for the fiscal year 2024 audit. Consistent with previous years, valuation of alternative investments is an area where we spend a significant amount of time. That will continue in the current year, and I would say we will obviously have a very in-depth focused approach as it relates to commercial real estate. Again, as a reminder, and Jen referred to this, we look at financially significant systems Benefit Connect is not generating information at this point in time that finds its way to the financial statements. That's still coming out of other systems that will be subject to our procedures. So that is not within scope of our current engagement. You guys engage us to be independent. I can confirm by both from a facts and perception, we believe ourselves to be independent of CalSTRS, both as it relates to the AICPA rules as well as the government auditing standards. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I am not seeing any questions, so thank you very much for your presentation. Oh, Dr. Yetman has a question. Excuse me.
Thank you, Chairman Bradford. Thank you for the presentation. Kevin, just a couple quick questions. One is, thank you for the consistency and the team in particular. Chris, send my regards, please. He's been with the engagement since the beginning.
Yes, he has.
Working on valuation of assets, which, as you pointed out, is a very important part. And that consistency, I believe, is highly valued. It brings back the talent every year. Personally grateful for that. Thank you. Part of this year's audit will be done, we're still in this post-COVID world, right, where we see a substantial amount of work being done, not just on this client, but all clients, off-site, and then a portion done on-site. What is your understanding today of how much work, what that mix is going to look like this year between on-site and off-site work?
So I would say we are things have changed since 2020. We have now recognized that there are certain procedures that we can apply just effectively and as efficiently from a remote process as we can in person. With that said, we also discovered from 20 to 23 that there are definitely procedures that we believe we need to be on site to perform, both from an effectiveness as well as efficiency for our staff, as well as your staff. I believe that last year we kind of really got back to where we need to be from a being in person as well as supplementing from a remote aspect when it makes sense. So the focal point is to be here on site and we'll supplement from a remote when possible.
Thank you for that. It makes sense. One more quick question, which is, as you point out, Benefit Connect is not in scope, will be in scope in the future. Is there anything you think we should be doing to, of course, the organization is working hard to bring that system online in a quality method and a timely method, but is there anything we can do or we should think about as a committee to help make it more auditable, or if you're here and so it's time for you to think ahead, look ahead, you're going to be auditing that, it's coming up. And as you look at that, as you look ahead, are the things that we can think about that we should be doing as a committee to help you get ready and make that more auditable?
You know, in a lot of respects, past committees, I believe, have put us in a good position to be able to do that. If I think back to the slide of the engagement team, we had 4 people with in-depth IT experience at the partner and senior manager level. In a normal staffing, I'd say that probably would have been 1 partner, 1 senior manager, but we have doubled up really to be able to focus on each year's annual audit as well as trying to keep abreast of pension solution. We now are kind of turned back on. That happened about 3 weeks ago with meetings and beginning to understand exactly where you're in the process, whether it be data transfer, testing, etc. So our approach is to not think of it as part of this year's audit, but we are very actively engaged in understanding where management is and understanding decisions that have been made so that when it is time to audit, we don't start saying, well, what if or why not, etc. We're trying to be actively engaged now.
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think aside from IT, because that's very specialized, even though we're having some of the same partners and folks from your team do the audit, everyone's changing around the portion that they're doing, I think is what you told me, so that you're not maybe auditing the same area 10 years in a row.
So there is
You can probably say that better than I just did. That's why I'm putting it back at you.
Great question. I wish I could say that we never lose good people at Crow, but that's not the case. Public accounting is a very labor-intensive profession. we lose people every year. So there is kind of a natural attrition, particularly at the staff and young manager levels. The people who are really doing the day-to-day work being supervised and reviewed by superiors or by other people. But there's a natural attrition there. So new people looking at information, understanding the controls, asking different questions. So there is a natural. We've also tried to take the approach, and that's why Jen and I are both here as well, of putting 2 partners in the room versus 1. It really, it keeps us from having kind of a mindset of, oh, I did it last year and it was fine, so it must be okay again this year. We have 2 partners in the room to really challenge us as far as assumptions being made and conclusions being reached.
Thank you very much. We look forward to hearing back how it's going. I think no questions here. So we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't ask for any public comments. Were there any public comments on item 3?
There are no members of the public.
Thank you. Okay, then we can go to item 4, Committee Education on Enterprise Risk Management. And I believe Julie's under the weather, so we have Cheryl and Lynn today.
Feel better, Julie.
I know, feel better.
This is the Lynn Show.
Oh, thank you. I like that name. Lynn Show. Yeah, Julie really wanted to be here, but she's not feeling well. Okay, well, afternoon.
Don't want it.
So it is noon right after? Yeah, okay. I'm Lynn Bashaw, Director of Enterprise Risk Management and Compliance Services. This is an education item on the Enterprise Risk Management Framework. Back in November, I presented an 18-month plan to mature the Enterprise Risk Management and Compliance programs. One of the key activities in our maturity work plan is to review and update the overall risk management framework, including the charters. It's been a year since we last provided you education on our risk framework, and we wanted to provide you a quick refresher on our risk program as it stands today. And then that sets the foundation for the upcoming recommendations that will enable us to grow and enhance our current risk and compliance practices. This maturity plan supports the strategic plan goal to enhance how risks are defined, viewed, and managed. I want to start with, why do we care about risks? In the context of our operations, risk is the possibility of something happening that could cause us to not meet business objectives. And the way we manage these possibilities, the way we identify and mitigate those risks, helps us to provide reasonable assurance in meeting our business objectives. So what is risk management? What's its purpose? Risk management is a process designed to identify potential events and manage risks to provide reasonable assurance, not total assurance, regarding the achievement of business objectives. So what's an ERM framework? Why do we need one? Why do we have one? An ERM framework helps us to organize our risk management processes. The framework is the policies, procedures, activities, tools used to effectively manage and assess risks. During this education item, we'll dive a little deeper into the framework components and how they work together to provide assurance. But first, let's talk a little bit about the existing governance documents that we have. Okay, so here's a listing of some of the CalSTRS documents and policies that either inform or support the ERM framework. These documents help to provide structure and guidance on the responsibilities of governing bodies, management, and staff in implementing the framework. For example, the board has a risk management policy, this committee has a charter, and the ERM program also has a charter. So these are some of the documents that support that overall framework. And as I mentioned, as part of our maturity plan, we'll be bringing some proposed updates to this committee on the framework and charters at the May meeting for a first reading. Before we get into more detail, let's talk about what the ERM framework is based on. How did we design it? Where did it come from? It's based on the COSO ERM model. COSO is an acronym for the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, and they're a group of well-respected organizations that provide guidance on ERM industry best practices. The COSO ERM framework guidance consists of these 20 principles that span across 5 components. I will go over them because there's a lot of them, but the takeaway here is just to know that we leverage this in developing our framework so that we have a structured approach for how this all fits together. So here's a graphical representation of the CalSTRS ERM framework. The framework's divided into 2 components. Component 1 is governance, and component 2 is people, process, data, and technology. In component 1, we have the board and the executive risk committee showing their responsibilities for oversight of the framework. In component 2, we have the business area risk owners, assurance groups, and internal and external audit. In the next few slides, I'll dive a little deeper into the responsibilities of each group. And fortunately, we have our chief auditor here in case I get anything wrong. So under component 1, the board's overarching responsibilities include establishing the overall tone and culture of the organization towards risk management. The specific duties of the board are outlined in the board's governance manual under the risk management policy. Some of the responsibilities under this policy include establishing CalSTRS risk oversight framework, periodic review of the risk management policy, and establishing risk appetite. The board has delegated some of its authority to the Audits and Risk Management Committee, this committee, to assist in fulfilling its risk management responsibilities. Specifically, one area that's been delegated to the ARM committee is oversight of the ERM framework. Also under component 1 of the framework is an executive risk committee, recently renamed the Executive Risk and Compliance Committee in order to incorporate their compliance responsibilities. This committee is comprised of your executive team and is chaired by your Chief Financial Officer and your Chief Operating Officer. The ERCC also includes your Chief Auditor and several business area directors in consultative, non-voting roles. Responsibilities of the ERCC include establishing a risk-aware culture, providing support to the ERM team, and ensuring processes are in place for managing risks. My team and I present to this committee quarterly. This slide shows the reporting provided to the board, the ARM committee, and the ERCC from Enterprise Risk Management and Enterprise Compliance Services. As part of the maturity plan for Enterprise Risk Management and Compliance, we're going to be evaluating the amount and types of reporting that we do and making some proposed changes. What this slide doesn't show you, that's important to note, are the reports you also receive from audit services on their audits and our external auditors, who you just heard from, on the financial statement audit. While these are considered part of our overall risk management framework, they're managed by your chief auditor. What this also doesn't include is all of the reporting the investment committee receives on investment risk and the reporting that actuarial provides to the board on risk. These are also considered part of the framework, but they're reported at a more granular level by those business areas by design. It made me so happy today to hear the word risk so many times when everybody was presenting, so that's always good. Component 2, so that's that lower half. That's going to be the people, process, data, and technology component. This part of the framework acknowledges that the people that perform the work, the processes used to support the risk framework, that data enables analysis, and that technology automates processes and detects issues. On the next few slides, we'll dive a little deeper into component 2. So this is the people portion, again, of component 2. The business area risk owners are management and staff, and we're talking about that first column on the left side, that perform the business functions, and they own the risks within their business areas. We have a group of risk champions selected by their branch executive that we meet with monthly to gather risk information, provide education, and discuss emerging risk topics. The aligned assurance groups, so in the middle, include Enterprise Risk Management, Enterprise Compliance Services, and the Information Security Office. These groups provide expertise on risk, compliance, information security to the business areas, and also provide reporting of key risks to management and to the board. Internal and external audit provides independent reporting on the risks of the business areas and on the financial statements. This is the process part of component 2. Our processes include identification of enterprise level risks, emerging risks, existential risks, and in performing branch risks assessments. We collect a lot of risk data is kind of what this slide is telling us. So we regularly review our existing list of risks for each branch and then assess whether they rise to the level of an enterprise risk. And we also look for emerging risks that may need to be evaluated or added to the list. So we then work with the business areas to evaluate and document how they are responding to their risks. The goal is to effectively manage and mitigate risks to ensure alignment with CalSTRS strategic objectives while minimizing the likelihood and impact of adverse events. So here are some of the ways that business areas can choose to respond to a risk. They can accept it, and so that's typically when no action is planned due to maybe the cost benefit of the decision. However, we still document the risk and we still monitor it. Share is the response used to transfer a portion of the risk to a third party. This may be an example of this is insurance or transferring some of the risk when we purchase insurance. Reduce is typically when the business area is going to take some specific action or implement a control. This is the response you're most commonly going to see to address our risks. And then avoid, that's the response used when we choose just not to engage in that activity at all. So we've decided it's too risky, we're just not going to do it at all. So continuing with process, building risk culture is an essential part of our enterprise risk management framework. Risk culture is built over time and is reinforced by the actions of the board, management, and through training. CalSTRS risk awareness culture is built upon our core values. Our employees are recognized for exhibiting our core value behaviors through the CalSTRS Employee Recognition Program, Virtuosity. And we also provide annual enterprise risk management training to all employees to promote awareness of their responsibilities as it relates to risk management. So for component 2, data and technology, this includes the information we gather and the software we use to support and inform the risk program. As part of the program's maturity plan, we're currently working to acquire and implement software to help streamline and enhance some of these processes. My team and I are very excited about this because it may provide the opportunity for some enhanced reporting to the business areas, the executive team, and also this committee. Once again, here's our ERM framework graphic. As part of our maturity plan, we will be refreshing this graphic and providing a framework document that describes these functions in more detail. By refreshing the framework graphic, staff aims to provide a visually intuitive representation of our risk management approach, enhancing clarity and alignment across the organization. Formally documenting the framework's components will provide education on key activities and processes and continue to foster a culture of proactive risk management throughout the organization. The updated ERM framework is currently scheduled to be presented to this committee in May. So as noted in your board materials, COSO has published updated guidance for ERM programs that focus on integrating enterprise risk management with strategy and compliance. As part of maturing the enterprise risk and compliance programs, we will also be incorporating that guidance into the ERM framework document and to the charters. So here's our timeline for reporting back. As the timeline shows, today, March 2024, we discussed the ERM framework as an education item. I'd like to bring back some proposed updates to the framework and charter documents for a first read in May, and then if needed, a second read in September. And in closing, evolution of the CalSTRS ERM framework reflects our commitment to continuous improvement and proactive risk management. And I'm available for questions, should you have any.
I have one from Jennifer.
Can I ask a quick question about how your team, when they identify risk, what is the feedback loop to internal auditors, or does the internal auditor group use some of the information that your team? determines? Like, is there an overlap or some kind of communication?
Yes,
So you've
yes.
identified something, you tell the internal audit group, they go and do an internal audit, they report back. How does that work?
Just like you described, we share information. Cheryl and I work.
Great.
Cheryl and I work very closely together. I'm a former auditor, so I'm also a certified internal auditor. Cheryl's a certified internal auditor, so I understand her processes very well. And we also do very similar processes. I do risk assessment, she does risk assessment.
Right.
And so we always are sharing that information back and forth to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, that we're able to leverage each other's work. And so we do have that very close relationship between our teams.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, I see no further questions from the board. Dr. Yatman?
Just very briefly, so see some new faces, just so everyone knows, the compliance function as a separate entity is fairly new within the organization. And so I'd like to thank Lynn, Ms. Bashaw, for taking something from nothing, or not much, and moving it forward in a careful, methodical way that will make a difference to the organization. So I'm very appreciative. It's hard to do that. And for the new faces, just in case you're wondering, well, wait a minute, what's she gonna do that she doesn't do? And that's not an unreasonable question at all, to say, do we basically have two audit functions now? And the answer is no. You just have one audit function. You have your external auditor who spoke earlier, then you have your internal auditors who do school district audits as well as audits of the organization. Compliance has a very different role. Compliance is embedded within and becomes organic to the organization. It lives and dwells at every level within the organization to show that all of us, everyone in the organization, has a role to play in risk management. It's not just the auditor knocking on your door and saying, I'm going to check your books and records. Who's in charge of the audits? Who makes all those decisions? Well, she does, right? But Lynn is not in charge of all compliance within the organization. All of you are, and all of the employees are. And Lynn's role is to help embed that ethos within the organization. So I think that's maybe the most succinct way to say, how are these two different? I hope that helped. Thank you, Matt.
Yes, thank you so much. Are there any public comments on item number 4? Seeing and hearing no one, thank you so much for your presentation, and we will move on to item number 5. 2023 Audit Services Plan and Final Progress Report.
Yes, as they make their way up, I'll just let you know that this is the work that we did in our plan for 2023. We finished it, and now we're just reporting back our results. That is part of our standards as from the internal audit, as internal audit shop. Here today, I have Chris Wall, the Assistant Director over Employer Audits, as well as Roseanne Oyoung, the Assistant Director over Internal Audits, and they're each going to speak to their areas of audit. I'll go ahead and hand it off to Chris.
Welcome.
So as Cheryl mentioned, I'm really just going to go over the 2023 results from our audit plan that was just completed. And at the beginning of the year, our audit goal was to complete 90 to 110 audits. And I'm very pleased to announce that our team had completed a total of 115 audits. They worked really hard on this process, and it was complicated a little bit by AB 1667. We had to change a lot of our processes, a lot of our audit plans, but they worked really hard, and we were able to not only meet but exceed our goals. And out of those 115 audits that were completed, we really review those employers employ approximately 80,729 members. And over that audit plan, we also identified 243 new audit findings that were associated with the audit plan. The next two charts here really is a breakdown to give you an idea of how many different types of schools that were audited out of the 115, and also what the scope and objective was for the 115 audits that we reviewed. And as you can see on the chart that says by audit type, 90 of the 115 really focus on special compensation. And that just has a lot to do with when we do our annual risk assessment, special compensation is really one of the higher risk areas. And this slide really carries over from the previous slide in that it shows you a breakdown out of, if you add all of these numbers up, it comes out to the 243 new audit findings that occurred. And as you can see, the top two areas really have to do with extra duty earnings. And what we're finding there is that the most common thing we see with extra duty earnings is that it's incorrectly reported as special compensation. And then the next one I'll go over are the other highest number with the highest number of findings would be the non-creditable compensation. And this really has to do with one-time payments reported for PEPR members is a large portion of that. Also, we do find areas where special compensation isn't in a written labor policy. And that's really the other most common way that it's non-creditable compensation is reported.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure, absolutely.
What's the difference between extra duty earnings and special compensation?
Good question. So extra duty so when we do our audit findings, it's really what should it have been reported as. So extra duty earnings is actually, there are additional assignments that are really not part of their regular earnings, but it's a different type of, it's part of their regular, an additional assignment that's in addition to their regular earnings, but it's not being reported as special compensation. It should be reported directly to the DBS, or the Defined Benefit Supplement Program. And you're not earning, and so you're not getting it's treated a little differently. Does that answer your question? Do you want me to go more detail?
And then how's that different than when you do special comp audits?
Yeah, so when we look at special compensation audits, where it's really remuneration in addition to salary,
Right.
and there are certain types of payments that qualify as special compensation. And so what we're looking for there is, are they being reported correctly? Do they meet the requirements of special compensation? And those payments are going to go into the DB, reported into the DB as special compensation, to where it's going to be all go back into your annual benefit at retirement, where your additional assignments are going to stay separate. They're going to be reported as an additional assignment. They're going to go into the DBS unless you're not receiving a full service credit. Then the amount will get carried over to, then you'll get service credit to make up the difference, so you get a full service credit at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
I had a quick
Sure.
and I appreciate sort of the year in review type numbers. It'd be helpful, particularly because I know that I'm not
Sorry.
alone being relatively new to the committee, but to have comparative numbers. So 65, findings, that seems like a lot, but I don't 100% know.
Yeah, so one thing I want to probably bring up as you mentioned that, the number is high, but it's high also because if you recall on the previous slide, special compensation is one of the higher risk areas we look at. And when you look at the 90 audits, they're more likely going to occur when we're looking at that specific limited scope area. And so I guess as you say that, when we're doing limited scope audits, they're broken down. And last year we did limited scope audits of special comp, we did limited scope audits of unused sick leave, and we did limited scope audits of base compensation. We also had a few full scope audits, but they're really carryover audits that we were wrapping up from previous years. But the special compensation is going to be covered not only in the 90 audits we did, where that was the focus, but we also look at special compensation when we looked at the 16 full scope audits as well. And so that's why you see such a high number in those areas, is because they were really the target and the focus of those audits.
I guess what I'm looking for is to see a nice scope that you've done the audit, you've presented the findings, and then there is a positive reflection back because of the audit took place.
Yeah, that's tough. So, agreed completely. So the quickest, I don't know if you're a fisherman, but let's assume you are. The reason they find findings like they are is because they go fishing where they think there's going to be fish. So it's not just random. They're going they don't have it up there, but they actually use analytics, data analytics, to decide where to go. So I'd expect a high hit rate. In fact, if we didn't, then I'd have a problem, right? If you think there's fish there and there's not, you're going to the wrong spot. So this shows me that we're going to the right place. We're looking at the right things. Now, your question is, what's the feedback loop? And if there is a feedback loop that works, why do we see findings keep occurring over time? And that's right. And the reason is, and I've spent a lot of time learning this over 20 years now, it really just comes down to human error. So you can imagine, pick a school district, San Diego, LA Unified, right? You can imagine that the person who's responsible, you heard just a slight discussion of the complexity of pension law and retirement law. And so you can imagine the person sitting behind a computer screen with a stack of paperwork on not just regular wages, but special compensation, special projects, overtime, sick leave, all this time, trying to code it into a system, right? And then that system is reported up. Mistakes, as long as there's a human being involved in that process, and there is, mistakes are going to be made. Now, you would like to think that the feedback loop would come back, okay? And in a perfect world, and there is a formal feedback loop, by the way, that comes back, and then that person would never make that same mistake again, okay? That's true, but I guarantee you that you go back 6 months, 12 months, 18 months later, it's a different person. It's a brand new person, and they have to be taught all over again. You see, the turnover is quite high, especially in these administrative positions that are in charge of entering this information. And so I have just become comfortable with myself to know that as long as humans are involved in this process and we have significant turnover, we're going to see these findings, despite the fact that these guys work hard to do a feedback loop, as you mentioned.
Jeff, would you like to add to that?
I would, thank you. Jeff Zimmer, Director of Employer Services. A little bit of background is that after audit services is done with an audit, they hand it over to one of my teams. And my teams are responsible for reaching out to the employer to make sure they make the corrections based on the findings in that audit. So to answer your question, we've instituted a 6-month follow-up. So after an audit, we communicate with the district and say, please correct these findings. And then everything Dr. Getman said was correct. But in order to ensure compliance with those findings and the education that we provide, 6 months later, we go back to the district and make sure they're still behaving the way that we expect them to. Sometimes, most of the time, they understood it and they're continuing to comply with the education that they received about the findings. Sometimes we find something new, but we bake that in to make sure that we go back and talk to them and about those specific findings that they were re-reporting the compensation for. I hope that helps a little bit about the feedback and the follow-up that we do. And back to Denise's question about extra duty earnings and special compensation. Extra duty earnings is earnings paid for the performance of additional service, whereas special compensation or remuneration in addition to salary is unrelated to the performance of additional service. So that's how we separate the two, and it's extremely common. As you can see, it's the most common thing.
Isn't this what 1997 is going to try and make
Yes.
easier for those people putting the codes into?
Yeah, it will make the, we call them buckets sometimes, but the categories of compensation will be more clear about where to put each thing. But still, the districts and the counties need to understand upstream of that, what is performance of additional service and what is remuneration in addition to salary. It should be easier to code, but they still need to make that distinction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope that made it clear as mud. It's a long discussion, and I'm happy to discuss it too, and staff, it takes a while. Okay, we have one more question. Liz.
Thank you. I have a question about the analytics or the logic that you use to predict where there may be findings. It was suggested that we go to the parts of the pond where there may have been fish previously, but also that there's a significant level of staff turnover, so the feedback loops don't always work, which makes me also wonder there may be new issues or new findings that occur because there are new people there as well. So how do we account for that when we're determining where to go looking and where to go fishing, essentially?
Yeah, so we are really expanding on our entire data analytics process right now. Cheryl's going to go over that in a few slides. But from our perspective, when we're doing our risk assessment, we look at all kinds of data that's been reported. And we're this year really looking at data differently than we have in the past, and we're really trying to dig down into areas like, for instance, if we think that there's a problem when someone received a salary increase, did they report it correctly? How can we analyze the data to pull out the most effective numbers to come up with, to target in on that issue? And we're finding good ways to do it. We're working with other programs within CalSTRS to figure out what are they doing, because there's already groups that look at data that's been self-reported, errors that come out, and how can we capitalize on that and really take advantage of what they're doing and build upon what they're already doing. So we're really looking at data, and once we get to the new payroll system, that's really going to enhance our ability to do that. So I think there's a lot of areas where we're going to be seeing improvements on how we look at that data. So they are definitely coming, but that's kind of what we're doing right now. And we're getting pretty good at it. For the most part, as you can see by the numbers, we're doing limited scope audits, but we're coming up with audit findings, the same number that we came up with when we did full scope audits, if not more. But it really has to do with the way we're able to utilize data and find numbers and errors. A lot of times before we go in the field, we suspect that there's a problem.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions. Please continue.
Oh, sure. This slide really goes into what Jeff was talking about on a previous slide. And we really do have a very robust finding resolution process where our audits resolution team, where we work with our audits resolution team who works with the employers to resolve all of the audit findings. And as you can see, and they work really hard at resolving the audit findings, so they were actually able to resolve 189 findings in 2023. And then when it comes to the in-progress findings, we still have 203 findings that are in progress that were directly found this year, so they're less than a year old. We do have 36 audit findings that are more than a year old, but we don't consider an audit finding closed until they've identified and closed all findings related to all impacted members. So the fact that there is 36 findings, it's a very complicated process. It doesn't really surprise me. There's going to be a few that do carry over because occasionally we get them that take a long time to resolve.
All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Roseanne to speak about internal audits progress.
Thanks, Cheryl. So I'm pleased to report that the internal audits has completed the audits of the 2023 audit plan, apart from the headquarter expansion audit and including 3 audits from the prior year. I'd like to extend my appreciation to the audit team for this accomplishment, as well as recognize the business areas for their cooperation. And I'd also like to point out here that the audits that have been completed provide coverage across enterprise risk as well as align with the strategic plan goal. And for additional detail on those audits that have been completed, please refer to Agenda Item 5, Attachment 2. So as a result of the audits completed, internal audits identified 40 findings. In the orange, you will see key findings where key risks are only partially or not addressed and require more immediate management action to reduce risk. In the governance category, although we have a governance structure and policies, we found gaps of critical information missing, impeding the ability to properly govern. Internal audits has a robust finding resolution process whereby we work with the business management and monitor the findings until resolution. At the end of the year, as of the end of the year, internal audit validated that management resolved 42 outstanding findings. Of those that remain in progress, 5 are over 1 year and 3 are key findings that are outlined in Agenda Item 5, Attachment 3. We continue to work with the business management to ensure risk is mitigated to an acceptable level.
And then beyond just the audits that are performed, not just, but the audits that we perform, we also do other activities. One of them is required by standards that we have a quality assurance and improvement program. And that program requires that we have external assessment every 5 years, and that in between that time, we do internal assessments every year. So our last external assessment was in 2021, where we fully conformed. This year, our internal assessment looked at governance, like the charters, and what the team identified was we still fully conform, but there were maybe some opportunities to clarify. So with Lynn, I'll be back looking at in May to look at our any suggestions we might have for the ARM charter and our internal audit charter. Then, as Chris mentioned, we are making progress on our restructure where we're creating that dedicated team for audit data solutions and operations, and that's going to be staffed with existing positions. So we're not asking for more positions, we're just redirecting them into that area, and that's where we can leverage the technology and really streamline our audit process using data analytics and other opportunities with data. And as was mentioned before, not just our data analytics and risk assessment, but being able to do trends. We get the data and we have a system we can start comparing year after year as well. So that's the goal of this team. When you're dedicated, you can focus on that. And then lastly, the Institute of Internal Auditors how would you say, published some new standards called the Global Internal Audit Standards that are replacing the old standards. So this is going to be a pretty good lift on making sure, comparing the two from the old to the new, make sure we comply. First area we're focusing on is the charters and the governance. So that's why, because we want to bring that back in May and not have you come back in a year to look at it, because implementation is not effective till January 2025. But again, we want to be early adopters, and some of those changes we already do, which is a good thing. So just to be on the lookout for that. We'll probably come back to May, September to discuss those standards and what that means for the ARM committee. And then I just wanted to leave you with, when I first started, we recreated the mission for audit services to simplify it so people could understand it. And this is a preview of it. And we haven't officially changed it because we want to add it to our charter, but that's a preview. And what was nice to see is the new standards, or the Global Internal Audit Standards. Our mission statement fully aligns with that. We might have to tweak it a bit, but it really aligns. So I think we're on target with the new standards. And that concludes the presentation. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, go ahead.
I think you answered my question, but are we pretty fully aligned with the global internal audit standards in terms of how we're set up, reporting structures, et cetera, with the exception of the changes that we need to make given the new recommendations?
Yeah, there's opportunities, like to clarify, I believe, but we are structured appropriately. Thinks there's some items that the team found that maybe a little implied, we can be a little bit more direct in. So that we're really looking at the mapping of it and to ensure we're spot on, because we want it fully conforms.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I see no further questions from the board. Dr. Yetman?
I was just going to say, Chris and Roseanne, thank your auditors for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it? Okay. No, Sky's going. Are there any public comments on item number 5? Okay, I do not see or hear any, so thank you very much. Thank you all for your hard work and your teams. We appreciate you. That brings us to item number 6. I don't believe we had any information requests. Nope. Okay, draft agenda for the next committee meeting. Is there anything you would like to highlight?
Next committee meeting will have a lot of action items. As you heard from Lynn, we'll have the ARM committee charter, ERM and compliance charter, audit services charter, the fiscal year 24-25 audit services audit plan, as well as the ERM frame updates.
Okay, are there any other statements from the public? Okay, seeing none, we have arrived at the end of our agenda for audits and risk management. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next time.